The wind never stopped screaming. It tore at the Antarctic plateau with a violence that erased any sense of scale, flattening distance and sound into a single, relentless force. Douglas Mawson lay inside a collapsing tent, listening to canvas snap and poles groan as temperatures plunged far below zero. He was more than 300 miles from safety, alone on a continent that did not forgive mistakes. His companions were dead. His supplies were nearly gone. What remained was his own damaged body, and the knowledge that if he stopped moving, he would die where he lay. Mawson had come to Antarctica in 1911 as part of the Australasian Antarctic expedition, tasked with charting unknown coastline and interior terrain. He was a geologist, methodical and disciplined, accustomed to risk, but not recklessness. In November 1912, he set out on a sledging journey with two men, Belgrave Ninnies and Xavier Mertz. They hauled supplies across a vast white emptiness, roped together as protection against hidden crevasses buried beneath thin snow bridges. Before the journey, Mawson drilled procedures repeatedly. Ropes were measured and knots checked. Dogs were assigned positions based on strength and temperament. Loads were balanced to reduce strain on runners. These precautions mattered when margins vanished. After Ninnis fell, Mawson and Mertz reconfigured the remaining sled, redistributed weight, and recalculated daily distances. They cut clothing into makeshift wraps and adjusted harnesses to reduce chafing. Science was set aside for survival, but discipline remained. Even retreat required planning. On December 14th, disaster struck without warning. Ninnis, traveling behind Mawson and Mertz, vanished in an instant when the snow beneath him collapsed. The rope snapped tight, then went slack. Mawson crawled to the edge and looked down into a crevasse hundreds of feet deep. Ninnis was gone, along with the strongest sled, most of the food, and nearly all the dogs. There was no rescue possible. In that moment, the expedition effectively ended. The landscape punished inattention. Snow bridges formed and collapsed without pattern. Sastrugi ripped at ankles and slowed travel. Winds scoured snow to ice, then buried it again overnight. Navigation depended on compass bearings corrected for drift and the faint memory of previous tracks. Each mile was earned through attention and restraint, not speed. They turned back immediately, now facing an impossible journey home. Rations were cut to starvation levels. To survive, they began killing and eating the remaining dogs. The meat was foul but necessary. Over time, Mertz weakened. His skin peeled, his hair fell out, and his strength failed rapidly. Mawson recorded everything, noting symptoms without emotion as his friend deteriorated. On January 8, 1913, Mertz collapsed and died inside the tent. Mawson buried him in the snow and dismantled the shelter. He was now completely alone. His own body was failing. His feet were blackened with frostbite. The skin on his soles peeled away, sticking to his socks. Fingernails loosened and fell out. When he bent over, his skin tore. Later analysis would suggest vitamin A poisoning from dog liver worsened the breakdown. Days blurred together as Mawson imposed a rigid routine to stay alive. He rose, forced stiff boots onto ruined feet, and packed the sled inch by inch, counting motions to avoid mistakes. He measured bearings with a compass he shielded from wind, checked the horizon for surface texture that hinted at crevasses, and advanced in short pulls, resting only when collapse was unavoidable. When fuel ran low, he rationed the stove, melting snow in stages to conserve heat. Food was weighed and divided with care. Crumbs were saved, and nothing was wasted. Each decision was practical, stripped of optimism. He kept a diary throughout, not to comfort himself, but to maintain order. Entries recorded miles covered, condition of the ice, the state of his hands and feet, and the weather's effect on progress. As his handwriting deteriorated, the sentences shortened. but the facts remained. He described skin separating from muscle, the pain of walking on exposed tissue, and the moment when his harness cut into raw flesh. He noted when he could no longer feel certain fingers, and when snow glare reduced the world to a burning blur. Equipment failed steadily. The tent tore and was patched repeatedly. Boots wore thin against blue ice, forcing him to improvise insulation. The sled's runners groaned and warped. Each failure cost time and strength. Mawson adapted by reducing loads, altering travel hours, and crawling when walking became impossible. He learned to read the surface with his body, testing each step before committing weight. The mental strain was constant. Isolation pressed in during long white afternoons when the wind erased all sound but its own. Mawson spoke aloud to keep his thoughts organized, reciting plans and distances. At times, he believed a companion walked beside him, then corrected himself and continued. Fear was managed the same way as hunger and cold, acknowledged, measured, and set aside so work could continue. When storms pinned him in place, he waited without panic, calculating losses and gains. He slept in short intervals, waking to check anchors and drift. When travel resumed, he forced himself forward even when progress measured less than a mile. The rule never changed. Stop moving, and the expedition would end in a shallow grave of snow. On February 8, 1913, Mawson reached the expedition base to find it empty. The relief ship had left hours earlier. He collapsed, barely alive. A small party returned and found him skeletal and unable to stand. Recovery did not end the ordeal. Mawson was fed carefully, treated for frostbite, and monitored for infection. He could not stand unaided. The months that followed were slow and clinical, focused on restoring weight and function. Only after stabilization did he recount the journey in full, relying on notes kept during the march. By the time he was safe, Mawson had tested the absolute limits of endurance, physically scarred and mentally changed by a landscape that punished weakness without mercy. His account remains one of the most extreme survival journeys ever recorded, not because of a single dramatic moment, but because every step was a decision made against exhaustion, injury, and isolation, repeated day after day when stopping meant certain death. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.